I'm John GRAFFT, and I love Chicago real estate. Between showings, I stop in my favorite places, talk with local business owners, and bring their story to you. This is my Chicago.
As I stare.
So this is one of my favorite places in Chicago. Again, had no idea you guys were a part of it until we started talking. How did this begin?
This began, we work with a developer, Convexity Properties. We've done a few projects on Oak Street with them, in the retail corridor there. And so they did own this building for many, many years. And they approached us with a potential tenant they were looking at, which was Restoration Hardware. Restoration Hardware looked at this site for, I think, even a few years, and they were looking at all kinds of sites in the city. And the CEO over there felt like this was a great place. I mean, it was unoccupied for like 12 years or something like that, run down,
I could
water
never imagine
damage.
this building in this location sitting for that long.
Yeah, and there was a lot of options that were out on the table years before for different type of uses. And what clicked with the neighborhood and what Restoration Hardware wanted to do was do a retail establishment. It wasn't going to be residential, which some people complained about on density. It wasn't going to be just a restaurant or any other sort of really active space. So I think their vision and what they wanted to do, and they promote this on their side, they blurred lines between retail and residential. So when you walk through the space and when we were approached, it was like we want to create sort of these vignettes for this space. They wanted to integrate the hospitality feel of having some food service in there. There was the experience of just the historic nature of the buildings, which they do a lot. So this is a landmark building. So it was a good collaborative effort with the developer, and Restoration Hardware came to us. We're like, we want to restore this building to its original state, and we want to put our program in there, which is basically the retail component, which they sell, all the home goods, furniture, everything else, but also the restaurant side of it, which is in the cafe that they have. And the big goals on this was like, so we went in there, we were like, we worked with landmarks in the city, we had vision of what we wanted to do with the building, and their program worked well to promote sort of the essence of what the building was. It was originally a place where women during the war studied the arts, so it was like painting, sculpture, music, all those things. So it was set up almost like dorms in a sense. So they had some classroom activities in dorms. There was a cafeteria. So it housed a lot of the pieces that we were going to repurpose it for in some sense. So that was a perfect fit. And what we ended up doing was, going through there, basically gutting everything down to structure and restoring all the exterior, redoing some of the parapets. And then the big moves on the project were the central space, which you guys are probably familiar with, which is
impressive room ever.
The most impressive room, this is the original fountain that was inactive and in disrepair. And
so this was there? That was on site?
That was on site. So there was an empty courtyard previously without a roof, and we have old pictures we could always share with you guys, but it was some outdoor elements, weeds, paving everywhere, all kinds of garbage, and we ended up cleaning it out and creating an indoor space with this great skylight. And a lot of these moves we made with the city were also related to visibility of new stuff with landmarks, and there was a certain restriction, so it was tough. So we could build new stuff, but we didn't want to detract from the existing building. So it was a kind of a balance of doing new integrated architecture repurposing, but still keeping the historic elements of the building. So it was a great project, and we restored everything, and the uses kind of highlight all the existing space, especially on the ground floor, which the majority of the ground floor is all just existing that we recreated and refabricated. So
it's one of those spaces that you walk in, as I know you mentioned before to us, and it's just like, wow, this is exciting. I want to come back here. And you can't quite put words to it, but it has great light, great proportion. The materials are rich, and just the lighting is, incredibly dialed in. And it's a space that, I love grabbing a glass of wine and just walking around there, which is one of the greatest parts about what they did here is that you could.
It's about integrating a little bit of drinking and shopping, which is another
Pretend
great
this
thing.
is my living room.
You could walk around and be casual,
right.
and the way the typical floors are set up, it's almost like you're walking through someone's home. So there's a
Right.
hallway, there's flanking vignettes of like a bedroom space. And
Yeah.
that. So that's
Yeah.
makes it really feel like someone's home. So it's not like a typical retail establishment.
And you look at through the windows onto the courtyard, which has its own great feel, and you can
Right.
sit. There's enough room on the ledges there.
Yep.
And then someone told me, so as you're looking down at the floor, you can see the wood that's still in there, and I was told that's where the dorms were. Is that right?
So that actually was yeah. So we went through demo work and discovered. So the original walls were laid out as a double-loaded corridor. So you basically had your main corridor around the center, and there was rooms flanking it. Well, the design for the floor plan layout was going to be the same thing, ironically. And once we demoed stuff, we were going to actually take those out. So the idea was to grind down existing concrete. And what we discovered was there's some wood strips, and how they originally constructed those walls, they were all concrete block walls. And the main plate that's on the floor is actually a trapezoidal plate of wood, so it wouldn't pull out of the concrete. So that was to stabilize it for construction reasons. So once we discovered how it was erected and installed originally, we're like, well, we can't do this. It'll destroy all the floors. We'll have to pull out and just re-pour everything.
Yeah.
So like, why don't we leave it there? It's a good story
great
of what was
element.
there, and it
Yeah.
actually fits in almost with there. So there is a little bit of a story of the old and the new mixing in, which was just another bonus that happened to happen. So
Yeah. Very cool. What else do we have?
Yeah, well, you know, I think that this board itself gives a great range of what we work on, right? We have a civic and retail project. We have a single family home that's in the Sand Valley Golf Course in Wisconsin. We have a computer design and research center that we're working at UIC in Chicago. So I think that, you know, at any given time, projects like this are happening in our office, and it shows the breadth of what we're doing.
These houses are really cool. So this is all around the golf course?
Yeah, we've done several. There's a great, I may not speak about this perfectly, but there's a great model going on there where the golf course itself will actually have a homeowner come in, and they'll facilitate the rental of those homes. So you can invest in the home and stay
Oh,
there
that's
for
nice.
several weeks throughout the year, but
Yeah.
they'll, during hot golf seasons, then you have kind of investment income there that people are renting it. So it's a great program.
And there's a lot of customization. So there's, you know, they're basically set up like you would expect sometimes, that there's certain lots available on sort of a new development of a golf course, but there is a lot of individual sort of design aspects. There's not necessarily one prototype, so there is a nice cluster of different types of architecture, still kind of fitting in with the aesthetics of sort of the site there, and sort of, I think, the woodsy feel, but it's kind of twisting it to a different sort of way of, you know, a little more modern, a little more different uses too, in different sizes, because they are trying to promote some flexibility on how many, you know, families would be there, or if they want to rent them out at a 10-person versus 12 versus 4-person house. So I think it's a unique opportunity we're actually doing a lot of work with, and hopefully to continue some other courses around the U.S.
What a cool project. And then what's this?
This is the Computer Design and Research Center at University of Illinois, Chicago, UIC.
I love the design of this coming through, and you can see it from that angle and this angle.
Yeah, in this project we actually partnered with a firm called Element. They're in Seattle. They've done a ton of these, and they're total experts in these types of buildings. And it was a really fun collaboration. They brought a lot to the project, and we're just a stone's throw away. We're like a 5-minute bike ride away,
Yeah.
so we can be there every day. And it's actually coming out of the ground now. The foundations are getting built. So
What's the timeline on this?
I don't know the estimated completion actually. Yeah.
Okay.
I would
Yeah.
imagine it's
I think
still probably
it's,
a year and a half or
Yeah,
so.
year and a
probably.
half out likely.
That even seems short to me.
Yeah.
It's hard for some builders to build a home in a year and a half.
Right.
Well, and this
That's
is
true.
an annex to an existing building too, so there's a little bit of the old and the new mix as
Is
well.
that right there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep. There's a beautiful atrium, which is this image right here, that is created in the space between them. That's one of the most exciting parts of the project.
Very nice. And then here's one of the buildings we were talking about.
Right, so these are some other things I worked on with Cedar Street. This is the office building transformation we were talking about. So this was an existing office building here, and this was also existing office space. So we basically stripped everything down to structure and repurposed the office use into residential. And the unique thing we did with this project was, since the floor plates were so deep for this office use, and it's not really ideal for a residential layout because the floor is so deep. I'm sorry. That's okay. I thought I had it off. Sorry. So as we went through this stuff, we started looking at how can we really get units into this building with making it efficient and still increase the unit count. And what we ended up doing was carving out the center of the building and creating a courtyard. So we ended up cutting the floor plates down all the way down to our second floor. So that allowed us to actually add units at the perimeter of the inside of the courtyard as well as the outside. So we inherently created more density, more units, but also created more outdoor space for them to look at. And that was a really cool move, and still was able to repurpose, most of the structure on the project. So
That's
Yeah,
such a unique
oftentimes when
element that I feel like no one would come up with.
Right.
Like carving out the center of a building.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of these older buildings, even buildings like this that we look at, they're so deep. Like even there actually are buildings that are firmed at above this that are very deep, and they're very interesting. But when you're doing larger units, it's almost too deep to be efficient. So we often look at taking a central court, and it just allows you to bring more light and air into the units and lay them out and take some of the depth out. So, because if you think about it, they're buildings that were often factories that
Yeah.
were designed and calibrated for a depth that's not what residential would be calibrated to today. So.
I wish I was selling real estate in the era where all those buildings were being converted. There's so few.
Yeah, there are. Yeah, this is a project it's called the Porter at Oak Park. It's a rental building in Oak Park in the Marion Historic District. It kind of bridges the balance between something new and kind of fitting in. So there's quite a lot of landscaped courts in Oak Park, so it was paying homage to that. And then also just providing really active retail. There's also a series of masonette units, which are 2-story units that are also along the street and enter through this court.
Okay.
So that was intentional to try to bring residential down to the street frontage and not have it as all retail or all parking.
That's nice. I feel like that's rare to see the masonettes.
Yeah. We have a couple other projects we did them on we can point out, but I think it's a really nice way to activate the street.
Mm-hmm.
this is more work with the University of Illinois, the dining residences. So this is close to the six-pack area, which is like a pretty prominent area in the university, centralized. And this project was another kind of combination of the old and the new, where we had existing elements of the facilities and the dining hall that was integrating in a new program of a new dining facility. And this is state-of-the-art as far as what's around the rest of the U.S. There was a lot of research done with the teams. I didn't personally work on this project, but I know this is a long-term project that put a lot of effort in, and it actually opened up during COVID, which was a little bit unfortunate.
Okay.
Students, it was a testing facility for a while.
So there is a little bit of interaction waiting for students to come back, but now it's, I think, up and running like full force. And similar to the other scheme we saw over here with the sort of open area annex. I mean, this atrium space, this centralized, that's sort of the private sort of main street that they created for this project to have the interaction with students and like a grand hall and stairs. So it's trying to mix in sort of the functions of the dining as well as sort of just studies and other things like that, sort of collaborative spaces.
So cool.
This is another project at Sand Valley, another prototype on a different lot.
This
So
home
similar
feels
concept
totally
though.
different.
Yeah, it's a little bit, similar materials, similar aesthetic to the roof because it is the same climate with a lot of snow.
So what's the thought process behind that for dealing with something like Wisconsin where you're going to have a heavier winter?
Yeah.
How do you design the exterior?
Well, I think we, like anything, we analyzed insulation. We do a lot of continuous insulation now on our projects. Just
What does that mean, continuous
Continuous
insulation?
insulation means when you have the studs framing the walls that you have a layer of insulation that continuously runs around it. So you never have a point of weakness.
Okay.
And it just really helps to improve your energy performance when you're heating and cooling. It doesn't let anything escape. So there's a lot of building technology we're constantly looking into that refines that. So yeah, actually these two projects, this one on the left here is in Grand Beach, Michigan. It's a retreat home and very similar climate, lots of snow in the winter, kind of moderate summers. So similar concept. This one is a good example of what I was talking about having something that can accommodate a multi-generational weekend with a lot of family, but also the intimacy of just a family unit one weekend or 1 week. And I think one way that we achieve that is often we break the house into smaller pieces. And I think you can see that on a lot of the houses as we walk around where it's not all like a 3-story mega house or something. It's broken into smaller pieces. So when you're occupying a space, it's scaled correctly and doesn't feel massive. And in so doing, you can zone the mechanicals to only actually heat or cool the spaces you're occupying to that comfort level. And it makes the whole thing a little bit more efficient and feel better too, right? Because you don't feel like with 2 people or 3 people, you're occupying a massive home that was meant to host 20, right?
And it does separate out sort of the public and private spaces. So there's like usually a centralized, public space in the sense of like living space and dining space.
Where
and then
everyone's
there's
meeting.
and then there's wings of like the bedroom area wings or a different function of a wing with some more activities or something. So there's always, based on the lifestyle again, if the centralized sort of space is where everyone can gather, and then these other appendages sometimes are how we break up sort of the massing of it is related to the use of the spaces and the privacy issue too. So it was like it's all thought out, and then we go through to our clients, and that's a lot of them like that experience of having sort of the separate components, separate wings of the house, and that's how these develop. In some cases they're very similar because I think a lot of people appreciate that sense of sort of the space and how to use the space works and how their lifestyle works, and I think that that's a positive because many of them feel that that's the way they live as well.
This has a very compound feel, and I love how you have the different layers coming down, so the different elevations of the property.
It's built on a natural sand dune, so we actually had to go through permits and regulations to not disturb the sand dunes. So one way that we're doing that...
So sand dunes are protected?
Yeah, and if they're over a certain
Interesting.
steepness in certain zones. So this is sitting on the sand dune, and then we're actually creating a series of stepped terraces, one that goes up to the pool and one that goes up to the living room. And it's provided an opportunity to bring native grasses in there and warm everything up. This is that living room space that you see in the bottom.
Okay.
Two views, and then this is the bedroom wing, and then there's a game room that comes off of that on the other side that creates the pool terrace. And that game room is really meant to, the sliding door is completely open and there's integral screens, and then there's a kind of gas fireplace. So it can be this kind of multi-season room that acts like a screen porch, and also a game room, but also there's Murphy beds that pull out of these walls, so you could have that as a flex schedule.
Oh, that's really cool.
So what we were talking about before, where each space has multiple functions and flexibility, but doesn't have a massive amount of square footage.
You would never think that you'd have Murphy beds in a game room.
Yeah, exactly, and it's kind of
cool.
just allowing something to flex into a different use that gives the house more value then.
This is someone's residence, right, or like a retreat?
Yeah, retreat home. Yep.
That's very cool. How often do you do something like this at this scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's something that during the pandemic, people had an itch to get out of the city, and what became important to them was family and the outdoors and enjoying that time together. And so we've done quite a few recently.
Some are looking into remote work scenario, but being remote, out of state in Michigan or somewhere else, real remote, and it's. To this day, I would say that a lot of people are still doing that, and I don't know if there's ever going to be a normal where they all come back to office entirely, but I think that was a lot of the focus. Like everybody, especially initially, was so afraid, like you said, and they want to just get out and get their own space. And none of them are at this scale. I mean, there was different levels of size and scale and proximity to the city, but I think as a general thing, everybody was really focusing on sort of that other second home for that purpose.
Can you mention total price cost on this?
Probably not.
That's okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. I had to ask.
More than $1, less than $1 million.
So I know this project. Our company's representing it. Tell me more.
Okay. Well, I didn't personally work on the project. I know a little bit about the history of it, but I guess this is more luxury condominiums. We looked at the site a while ago with our client, and this is sort of the Fulton Market, morphing sort of the industrial feel with the context of the city. And what we tried to do with this building was also the efficiencies and using sort of systems for costs. For what they did initially, I guess, really is the study of the structural system and precast panels and panelization, and getting things erected efficiently and quickly and save cost on some of the construction. So some of the technologies are the precast panels, and all the bricks that are in here are actually inlays into precast panels. So it's not a traditional brick setup, which works structurally. It can be erected quickly. It has the feel of a true brick cavity wall construction, but and it's not false. It is brick being used on there, but it's a different way of erecting it than the traditional way of.
So the brick is only giving a design element and not any structural element.
Correct. Yeah, the main structure is actually the precast panels, which was done because of the efficiency of the panels, getting it erected quickly. Those are the two biggest points. And looking at a development like this, you can save money there, and it lets you put more money into units and finishes and all the stuff we spoke about before. So I think the technology of that, and it actually, for anybody else, they may, if I wouldn't have said that, they probably say, oh, it's a traditional brick building that they built up. And So I think the aesthetics were, again, more towards the industrial side. These are bigger units, a lot of outdoor space you see with the balconies, so it creates some sort of outdoor, indoor feels and connection with the interior.
Yeah, they're three-sided living rooms, actually, which are phenomenal. So
What does that
I think
mean?
three-sided windows of glass right there on that peninsula.
Okay, got it,
so
got it, got
they
it.
just create really interesting spaces that I think bring a lot of value. There's a nice big terrace, so I think we've all yearned for that the last few years. to have some
That's the
outdoor
design moving
space, right?
forward for sure. You
Yeah.
can definitely see that.
Right.
You see a lot of duplex downs now. There's been this push of this outdoor area in the back of the
Yeah.
home that
Right.
traditionally was there, but it wasn't as large, and now it's become a room unto itself.
Right.
And how on your end, have you heard positive things?
Only
about
positive.
it? Right. I mean, I know
Only
there's
positive.
been some of the purchases and stuff I've heard. Who's gone in there and out? Some sports figures, like you mentioned too, and so I think it was unique to that area. I mean, since then I know there's a lot of more other developments that are kind of following lead with some of the unit sizes. Like I think the unique thing here was these were larger units. There wasn't, I guess, a niche for that necessarily in that area, but now it seems like the larger unit with families was kind of an incentive to build something bigger, the 3 bedrooms plus, because that was really lacking in that area.
That's right.
So I think that was another
think-
positive for this project.
I think everything's pushing in that direction where it's like, hey, we don't need a home. We want to be in a multifamily building,
Right.
but we want a home feeling.
But we need a little more space than
Yeah.
a traditional 1 bed or 2 bed, you know. So it's okay, like you're saying, when you have a newborn and, you know, it's, if you have 2 kids, well, a 3 bedroom would probably be okay if you have enough space, you know, and it's like we can still make it work. There's still a lot of outdoor space and parks nearby and amenities, so I think it's just adapting to that, you know, more than 2 kids or 2 kids plus is the one that was
That's gonna be the
missing.
struggle.
Yeah.
Talk to me in a couple of years.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a project, the model's right here too, that is, it was actually our first project in Palm Springs. We've done several now. One which I can show you in a second, which is another home. But it's, you know, the whole intent was, again, this breakdown of certain wings to break it into pieces that are more intimate. The kitchen being kind of at that knot right looking over the pool. And then this long linear piece of art kind of shaped the design of the living room. What's not shown in this, it's one of our houses too that I love these. I think it's one of the most beautiful photos we have. When you go see the house, it's like incredible. Like you walk into this court with rosemary bushes and olive trees, and it's just calming and serene. And it's one of these things that even a photo can't communicate. So I think it's a really good representation of the landscape design. We partnered with a firm called Hairshout that we often do projects with, because they really just the same curation of a concept and sense of spaces on the inside that we achieve, they also do that on the outside, and when the two come together it creates something really beautiful.
So that's an example of using
Yeah.
a good consultant, or is that
Landscape-
outdoor
landscape architect.
Landscape architect, yeah.
So yeah, I can see obviously the relationship of interior to exterior on these are pretty evident in some of the other schemes too. And the really simple sort of form of the plan is what we talked about, sort of simple bars, a simple connection between them. And that's sort of the efficient way of doing sort of separate spaces, but it's really simple in the sense of how it was designed. It's not trying to be too complex. It's These are the functions of the program. This is a function. There's a connection between them. There's a wing separation, but it starts to create the architecture, as you can see. So
Yeah, I didn't mention this before, but we hate corridors.
Okay.
Because I just think corridors, like how much square footage are you giving to
Wasted
something that's
space.
just walking from one thing to another? So we're
Yeah.
constantly striving to, both in multifamily rentals and condos and also homes, try to eliminate corridors. And like in multifamily buildings, I think when we design units, we have several things we always achieve. Can you walk in and very quickly see the living room or natural light? Can we eliminate as many corridors as possible? Our bathrooms laid out such that when you walk in, you don't see the toilet right away. You know? And it's just no-brainer things like this that aren't always easy to achieve that are very important. So I think they're almost unspoken, but they bring an incredible amount of value to real estate. And we talked before about laying out spaces such that there's a space for kitchen table, and there's space for the furniture to lay out in a logical way, but not excess space. So I think that's something we strive to do. This project at 61 East Banks was another project that has these 2-story units on the street as one of the prototypes. So you can see those right here. This is right on Lakeshore Drive. And then some pretty beautiful units above that look out towards the lake. They have a great common terrace too that is the place to be for the air and water show for sure.
And these were one of the last few remaining
Yeah.
lots on Lakeshore Drive.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was surprised the building was so small.
there were iterations many years before.
Yeah.
This was a long process to get to this point. So
I believe that.
going through the development process, like I mentioned, with planning the neighborhood, there were schemes of a taller building. There was a lot of pushback from the neighborhood, the aldermen, everyone else. So unfortunately, we would have wished it would have been taller and bigger, and what we originally
I feel bad for the
designed.
developer. I mean, just seems like a lot of lost opportunity.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the proportions and what we ended up was a good project still, and the spaces are unique, and we are similar to the other project, the outdoors, like the corner space of the living room, and having sort of multiple sides of glass and vision, especially exposure to the lake. So that was kind of the big move as far as the bay window schemes, and everything else fits in with the context or for the limestone feel.
It's
You
definitely
see
the
it.
most beautiful home on that block, or building on that block, because everything else stands out because of its height,
Right.
not because of the structure. And this stands out because it's a beautiful building.
Right. And then this project just shows a little bit of our capacity on building types. This is a hotel, more of a boutique hotel in Birmingham, Michigan. And, this particular project, I guess the big moves here were, again, to do something simple, something that had an elevated level of design. We worked hand in hand with, I don't recall the interior designer in this one, do you, Mark?
I forget. We'll have to ask.
I didn't
Okay,
work.
let me know
I
later.
didn't work on
We'll
this
plug it in.
project, but yeah, I mean, they did a great job on some of the interior space. I mean, our clean lines on the exterior. Again, this was more of a limestone, it's a cast stone project. But what we really look at on some of these simple projects, and you'll maybe notice that as sort of an element that we look at a lot in our buildings, is how we treat sort of the openings relative to surfaces, and that kind of is important to get that little bit of highlight detail and shadow, and I think that's what kind of punches our buildings and makes them simple but really great, because there's those little subtleties of the detail that maybe not everyone picks up right away, but you can differentiate that between another building easily by what we do. So I think this was a great project. The interiors are great with the team we worked with on this one as well, the lighting in the spaces, the corridors. It had this traditional feel is what they wanted to do on the interiors, but it was something that community didn't have, that sort of higher level of hotel versus your 2-star, typical ones you see in small towns. This is close to the University of Michigan and all that, so they needed sort of that, which I think most colleges probably need, that for all the alumni and all those to show up. There's another level of kind of quality and closer to a 4 or 5-star hotel versus
Well, you
a
said
2-star.
Birmingham, and I was like, Alabama? That's in Alabama.
No, that's in
Yeah, the corner windows give a sort of really amazing view down the street, and that's a special feature. Then you have a special unit that you can rent that has that extra upgrade, right?
And then this just shows a little bit of multifamily, but this is more probably market rate level stuff. But we kind of do high end, market rate, affordable, all kinds of types based on our clients. And this is just another new development trying to spur more residential near the Indianapolis area. Very efficient units, compact design, working with local zoning, and it's kind of new to that area. These were empty lots, and they were relatively close to single-family homes, so we're trying to look at always scale and how this fits into the context, which is very important. A lot of these developments of how it feels at street level as well as the surroundings. So I think that's a good example of kind of looking at scale of what you're working with and being harmonious with it versus trying to be aggressive and try to do something that doesn't fit.
Oh, sorry. We also have a series of spec homes on the site too that you could just see the corner of. That, forget the number of them, but there's several in the development that kind of ground it and give just a diversity to what you can potentially live in on this site, right?
Opportunities, right, with the developer. That's correct.
That's a huge kitchen.
It's a great kitchen.
Yeah.
Actually, this project, this is a fun one. I think these two, just a big picture comment is, I think when you look at these two homes, there's clearly, like, Booth Hansen does not have a style. It's really about a unique site and clients' vision and goals and our process that can create two different buildings like this. The one on the left is in Michigan, and it snows a lot, and there's steep roofs, and it's more of a kind of
Cottage feel.
lake cabin, lake cottage. And this one is much more about, there's fantastic views of the mountain, and it's much more about creating exterior spaces that are shaded and comfortable, even in hot days. And the client loves to cook, right? And they have lots of friends over and they cook. So actually the kitchen, this is actually a view when you just walk out of the kitchen right there, is framed with on one of the best views because that's where we're going to spend the most
It's a
time.
very good view.
Yeah. So, and on the other end is this amazing private garden with a curated palm tree, and it's really fun. I mean, I think that this is another one where there's on the bottom left there's several guest casitas, so the client can have their family
really cool.
and friends there and really create memories with them. And the top part is really about entertaining and a more social aspect of spending time with your family and friends. So
How many are there at the New Buffalo Residence, or is this one home?
that's one home.
one
Similar
home, okay.
idea though.
Yeah. It gives it the look
yeah.
like it keeps going, right?
Well,
in
that
either
helps actually to
direction.
break
Yeah.
down the scale. Sometimes we
Yeah.
do that for visual reasons too. It's related to the program and function, but I think when we look at something too in these types of projects where it's a single family or a large project like that is when you start increasing sort of facade and how long does that feel and scale, and then you start breaking that down a little bit. And then I think that's what these do successfully. It's like the uses are broken down as far as plan orientation, and then you start looking at elevations and how do those relate. So it helps in both ways, I think, of breaking down scale, but it also develops sort of this unique look of the architecture as well.
And each space has a little bit of a different character, right? This living space is very volumetric and airy. Other spaces are a little bit more compact, like the entry that you see right here. It's a little bit more compact.
That's the entry of the home?
Yeah,
Oh, interesting.
actually,
Well, it's similar. There's certain
the entry
wings.
is on
So
the
the
other side. So
yeah, okay. Do you remember when that one was, or what that was, or what that is?
It's a chimney.
Yeah,
Oh, it's a chimney. Okay, it looked like it was glass for a moment.
It's probably a metal screen because we're really conscious of what we see as far as stacks and flues in our homes and our
Yeah.
high rises as well. So we try to screen stuff. So there's probably more likely flues
Right.
here with that screening off. So
Got
that's
it.
intentional, and that's a little subtlety that we care about a lot. Some other firms don't, like tops of buildings. What they look like on high rises. We're going to see all these mechanical units, or we're going to screen it, or we're going to do something that's really integrated. It's like we
Right.
thought about it and see where these things lay out versus an afterthought. And I think that only helps these sort of, obviously the photographs and what our intent is, but I think the aesthetics too. It's like we want to make sure we look at everything, including
Every
that.
angle.
Every
Bird's
angle.
eye.
well, simplicity is not easy, right? Simplicity is what makes something beautiful and clean, but it's hard to achieve because you're trying to organize a lot of things in a very logical way to occur where you're intending for them to occur.
That's one of the most
Yeah.
underestimated statements
Yeah.
because I think good design, you don't even understand why it's good design.
Yeah.
You just look at it, it's beautiful, and then you spend more time in the space, you pick up the subtleties all throughout, but it's clean and it's simple.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
that's what our founder too, Larry, always mentions. Like you want to make it evident when you look at it. There's no sort of questions. When you look at it, you understand the building. It feels right. There's no like,
Yeah.
why did they do this or what? It's like the clarity is there, and I think that's important too. Is you kind of look at architecture as like, oh, it's very easy to look at. It's just not distracting. It just feels right, and like you did something right just by looking at it. And some people have that sense too, and we do too.
Right.
We look at it and it just feels right. Like there wasn't these other things that people are trying to do to dress up the building or make it sort of trendy, and that's just the simplicity is all it's needed, I think. That helps.
That's a really good thing about not asking questions, because every time I'm in a home and I have a question, then I'm like, okay, I have to prepare for that objection. I have to have some type of answer, right?
Yeah, right.
And the answer you have to come up with sometimes.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and back here we have a lot of events at the office, and we collect quite a bit of materials, so we can just grab things and collaboratively talk about what materials we want to use in a project. And
Just don't cut yourself.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's the metal in between. That's really cool.
Yeah. A lot of
yeah,
different-
we've got a model shop back here.
So that's what they're doing here.
Yeah, there's a study model like I was telling you about.
Yeah.
Just a hot wire slicing through foam.
It's hot.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's a heated little
The
wire.
fumes are healthy. I suppose.
And then you see like some other models we spoke about. So these are a little more developed than a foam model, but a lot of these foam models we do just to show context, and typically it's used sometimes in meetings with the city or municipalities, or sometimes for our own purposes of understanding scale and surrounding context. So
Shadow studies also. Yeah.
we
What's
try
a
to-
shadow study?
Shadow study is like your building. What shadow is it what shadow is it casting on the neighbors, which often you have to actually prepare that in a plan development submission or a lot of processes in the city, but it's also, is your building getting light where you want it to get light? So there's a pool deck that you design getting the proper light throughout the day that you want it to based on your neighbors and anticipated neighbors that could come down the road, right? So there's things like that that we're constantly studying early on. That's part of those feasibility studies Andy was mentioning earlier are taking that into account also from day one, is properly siting it so it gets light, right?
The level of thought that you put into these things when you're dealing with city officials, are they having that same depth of thought of what's going to happen down the line, what's happening now, or are you just doing it to make the best project, or is it a combination of both?
Well, sometimes there's priorities on both ends that align. Sometimes there's priorities that the city cares about, and some that an agenda that we're trying to push because we think it's a better project that we bring to the table. So
Yeah, and if it's worth fighting for, we'll fight for it. I mean, there's discussions on, sometimes it's subjective on what is right as far as we like it this way, or we like this, or a little bit shorter, or a little bit taller would make that difference. And we try to prove through these studies and other studies, through drawings or shadow studies or anything else, why we feel that this direction is the most beneficial for all these other reasons. And that's a lot of it, not only for ourselves, for our client, like we feel that this is the best, direction we should go for this project based on these studies that we've done and the research we've done. Because a lot of the upfront work is about looking at all these options, looking at the pros and cons, and making decisions to take you to the next level. And hopefully you have enough data there to make those decisions. That's what we're always trying to do, is like, we have enough here to make a decision. I think that's true for anything you do. If you have the information, you can logically go to the next step and not go backwards on it. And I think all these things do that, and we try to, and sometimes we're wrong. We'll look at stuff, oh, that doesn't look right, doesn't feel right, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. We're not trying to say the first idea is the best, and I think that, that's something that just has to be done through some of these studies, whether it's through foam, whether it's through 3D modeling on computer,
sketching. Yeah.
What's cool about this foam model is you can see the shadows.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you take a model like that outside, and if you orient it right, it'll be the shadows that
you'll actually see in that place.
And you'll get a sense of what it's going to feel like.
Does sometimes you have to do that for those?
Yeah, occasionally. Oftentimes the computer we can iterate quicker as times of day.
Because you can do different seasons. Here we're only looking at today, this season, right? Versus winter, we're going to have.
What type of software are you using for this?
Well, it's all the software. We have the BIM software we're talking about, Revit and other designs.
What are the names of it?
Skills, SketchUp and Rhino we use a lot. Enscape is one of the rendering softwares that plugs into all of those. Yeah, we use those as, they're like integral, it's like a pencil, right? You got to just have it as a quick tool to study an idea, whether it's for a shadow study or a massing study or facade articulation, So all of those are just tools that we have that we can quickly study things. Yeah.
That's cool. And so on the other side of the wall were the things that are accomplished and finished, and here are the things you're working on currently?
Yeah, these ones are actually some finished projects, but as we move a little bit further, there's some in-progress studies or initiatives that we're working on.
Without going into individually all these, but you'll see this is more sort of civic work that we've done. We've done some field houses. We actually had a few prototypes we did for Chicago Park District field houses, and this is just one of them where it has an integrated gym, community space. So we did a lot of those years ago because it actually worked out with the city and what their improvements and plans were for these park districts. So that's good that it gave actually new facilities for all these areas of the city, and they're all over. We've done a few. The Botanic Gardens is another client that we've worked a lot with. This particular one is a science center, and this was like basically it's a place where they can actually research, and it's visible for the public as well, but it's an ongoing research facility in their labs, and including the green roof. So there's an active green roof. They're trying different plant media, what grows in our climate and what doesn't. So it's not only there for visual reasons, and then because the Botanic Gardens has all the sort of greenery and landscaping, but it's also for research reasons, which is a different thing that people don't know about. And you can learn about it too, because they do have displays and talk about what they're doing at this area. And this is another project that we do we were looking at some studies and some master planning for Brookfield Zoo. This is just one of their little pavilions, but we've done a lot of studies throughout the zoo, and we're going to look at some more opportunities maybe this year as well to look at their master plans and what they're looking to kind of, I don't know, re-energize and look at their big picture goals. Because during COVID, everything was pretty much slowed down, less sort of traffic through there. So now they're kind of trying to re-envision what their goals are for the actual property. So.
This is a house in Canada, so St. Joseph Island. It's on, I believe, Lake Huron. It's clad in black zinc, which is a really cool natural material, and the whole house was designed black so that from the lake it wasn't very obvious that there's a house, and it's sort of camouflaged into the trees and the landscape.
It's so matte.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of sheen to it too. Yeah, which is what we liked about it. And,
even on the interior, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
And, I love this house. It looks really cool.
Yeah, this is our first ADU, although it's not a dwelling unit. It's a dance studio above the garage. As you enter the house, you can kind of see it right here. But
is that it back there?
Yeah, it's it back there, and it actually the entire house is lifted on stilts, and that allows us to not really impact the land. Yeah, any water just kind of runs off underneath the house.
Oh, so that's the reason?
Yeah.
So it's not for a foundational purpose?
It
acts as that.
It acts as that because of the slope of the site, but it just allowed for a little bit more of a light touching of the land.
Yeah, less disturbance. Yep. And it's kind
so that's the reason you see that
sometimes.
sometimes. If you don't want to disturb the land as much.
Well, sometimes with the water tables too. I mean, depending if there was any time that the lake would elevate in water levels, it's another reason to do that. I mean, you could see even locally, we did a project in Lakeshore Drive, or right along the lakefront, where the rising tide now, and then what we're getting with some of the shoreline erosion and increasing water heights, it affects some of that. So this is relatively close to the edge of shoreline, so that's something we have to consider. And we talk to consultants and what the expectations are with rainfall and all that. So I think that was a part of the decision making too, which is good. I mean,
also elevates you to get the views a little bit better. So
good point.
Dual purpose, right? Yeah. It's another field house, and then these are actually some of the studies on the accessory.
You guys do a
dwelling
lot of
units
civic work that I had no idea about.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun because we can actually go visit with our families and enjoy them, right?
Like I did this.
Yeah, it's harder to do that on some of the homes. But this is some of the studies on the accessory dwelling units. So it actually started with a competition that AIA put on that we entered, and some of the research from that, where we were actually attaching the ADU to a back of a new prototype. And then as we went through the task force that I was describing, then this is a kind of drawing that shows all the different types that we were imagining. So, and these are the prototypes that we've now developed based on the ordinance, that are anything from a greenhouse above a dwelling unit to a dwelling unit on grade if the parking isn't required to have 2 spots on that particular lot, to a more efficiency unit that's a studio unit above a 2-car garage.
And which one of these are you able to build today?
You're technically able to build any of these, but it depends on the site.
Okay.
So like these 2 are probably the ones that if you had a typical 25 by 125 foot lot, you could build either of those.
This seems like a great
accommodates
design.
2 parking spots. Yeah, we like that one a lot.
Yeah.
This one would require you to have parking that doesn't exist on your lot, or only one space that exists. So in some cases, like you can prove that I never had a garage here. I actually had a tree in my backyard.
Yeah.
And then you could build a unit like that. Or if you have a wider lot that you only needed 2 spots, you could park to the side of it and then build this.
Do you know if there's any talk of them expanding those pilot areas, or?
Definitely. I mean, that was the whole point of the pilot areas, was let's test this out, let's see how it works, let's learn from it to refine it, and then let's adopt this citywide. So that's my hope. That I don't know when the timeline is.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is sometime in the next year or 2 that they'll have those discussions to expand it citywide. And there's definitely some ideas about tweaking some of the data and the numbers in terms of the square footage cap that's on there, so that you could have more family-sized units. Because right now, quite honestly, it's really hard to fit a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom
700,
unit.
it's impossible.
Yeah, 700. The only way to do it is really to occupy the basement, which doesn't count towards your FAR area, and then you can do
so
that.
some of these have basements?
This one does. It has a basement
that's
partially
cool.
dug, so there's clear story windows, and that was a little bit of a loophole.
Oh, wow.
where you
Yeah.
could dig the basement and have 2 bedrooms down there and a bedroom at the top floor, and the kind of first level here was kitchen, living, dining.
Oh yeah, because it's 700 above. Okay.
Yeah, so basically,
That'd be
yeah.
great.
Yeah, this is a great prototype.
I never even knew that
Yeah.
was an option.
But it requires there's very little lots within the pilot zones that qualify for this for this. So that's what the tricky part is.
So when they
right?
change it moving forward, they need to get rid of that limitation and allow you to do this regardless.
I hope so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope the 700 square
And this
foot,
is where
yeah.
the cost comes into play
Yeah.
too, right? So anything you're gonna dig is
That's
probably
an
gonna cost
expensive
more.
bill.
So that's an
Yeah.
expensive, but it may make sense in certain areas or what
Yeah.
you're trying.
Well, I
That
think
depends what your goals are, right?
Yeah.
This one gives you the ability to actually have a small family live there, which I like about it. I think that's important for these moving forward, is that they're not just bachelor pads.
Yeah.
That you could have multiple people living there, and there's a little bit more flexibility.
I can tell you have a real investment in the use and the bigger picture of all of this.
Yeah, a little bit of a passion project.
Yeah, I can tell.
For our office, for sure.
Oh, they're discussing stuff. I don't know what's gonna
Okay.
be loud or not. I can hear some background. They're going out of pause or.
Ours are good because of the mics. They hear us.
Okay. Well, Kelmscott Park is another larger development we did up in Lake Forest. The whole function and use, this is mixed in between some single family, some large rental buildings, as well as some townhouse elements. So it's a unique mix of sort of different housing types to fit different buyers, different demographics.
Nothing that was pre-existing. This is all
This
one
is
new
all
site,
new. This
right?
was one entire new site we created, so the whole landscaping and approaches to the building and how the layout worked on the site. I can't remember the number of acres on this particular site, but it was a big development. And it hasn't been something like this in Lake Forest in a long time. So
Yeah.
I think our developer was kind of new grounds, and the intent also was to provide another type of housing, which primarily in Lake Forest you think of as large homes, large mansions, and this was trying to break down sort of that nuance and trying to show something that it could be smaller scale, downsizing rental, but still wanted to be in the community. And this is also close to the rail station, so it helps with commuters and kind of have a place where maybe people still want to work downtown, commute, but still have it close to the train station, or maybe a younger demographic even going and looking at this versus traditionally it's always been sort of the older demographics and being in kind of single family homes, where this is a different type that would maybe entice others to come out further.
One of the amazing things of 2020 is areas like Lake Forest and Barrington, where I grew up, were devastated. They had a bad real estate market for a really long time because older homes, younger people didn't want to take care of them. They didn't want to have to rehab them to bring them up to date.
Right.
And then the pandemic changed all of that.
Yep.
But this makes perfect sense for that area.
Yeah, this is the computer science building that we showed earlier, and this is actually at the University of Illinois. It's a parking garage that we're working on.
So how do you get excited about a parking garage?
Oh man, I love it. It's all about the facade and the screening and
It's efficiency.
And, yeah,
I mean,
it's data and architecture. It's a great project type. I mean, what's fun about it is that it deduces some of the variables to things that you can really focus on and key in on. So
Okay.
So this is about putting in as many spaces as you can on the site. Your height limitation, you're looking at cost, and then you're looking at what can we do to the facade to integrate with the context, right? And that's a lot of the study. So once you kind of figure out the efficiency, then you're kind of hand to hand looking at how that's treated in the facade and still make it architecture, not just a parking garage. So I think, and especially working with some of these in universities and other areas, integrating into the campus and integrating into existing buildings is a big deal. So we have to make sure they're really design conscious, and that's good for us because that's what we want to do, is kind of not make it look like a parking garage.
yeah, in this case, this is an exciting project because it's actually a transit node here that we're creating, which becomes a sort of civic plaza. So throughout the year, there's different events that can happen there, and also there's a potential plan to have this almost be like a battery for other buildings with solar power.
Okay.
So that's
Oh,
exciting
that's
for
cool.
us too. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't talk about solar power. How does that ever come into play in what you do? Is it tough here? I mean,
It's tough on
Yeah.
the climate sometimes,
Yeah.
and where your building is sited and all those things. I mean, in our climate, I think it's a little tougher sell sometimes with our developers now for single family, maybe a little bit different, but how many times during the year do we get like, this is all analyzed through our programs we look at, and then there is some efficiencies we look at in the cost and when's the payout. So it's about real cost still, and then where things are price-wise for purchasing. So I think it all goes hand in hand, and we again provide the data and then decide on what route we're going to go with our clients based on the information they have. In some markets it may make sense, or some project may make sense more than others. I mean, it may make more sense for some projects to do geothermal heating versus doing solar panels because of either proximity or digging down, the cost of digging down for geothermal if there's a lake nearby, and then maybe solar is not as a big a deal based on either economics of electricity utility costs or how compact the building is and all these other things. So I think it's just a balance of looking at the information and making a logical decision.
I've heard of one geothermal home in Chicago. I'm sure there's more, but have you done them?
In Chicago, there is one. I didn't personally work on it. I've done some more out, in Beverly Shores. I did one which is near the dunes, and a lot of these sort of lake houses. There's more land available because it's all about capacity and how far you want to drill.
How does that work? I know nothing about it.
Well, if the footprint's not big enough, you can't have so many holes to go down and dig down for the wells, so you're kind of limited on space, which means you have to go deeper to get the capacity you need, because it's also a ratio of how much available pipe that you're digging down. So the more holes you have, the shallower the holes can be versus doing long ones that go deeper down. It costs more to dig. So that's why you don't probably see it much here, because the land available, because they're small lots we were mentioning earlier, restricts you on how much capacity you can get. So it means sometimes you have to go really deep. And there's other issues in the city about board of underground and utilities we have in the city is not as easy as an open land site.
And so if you were, the reason people want to do it, what's the leading reason?
Well, hopefully it's for energy efficiency and long-term sort of goals of, improving costs on utilities. And
Same thing for solar, right? I think if you don't have enough roof surface area or you don't get proper light that it's efficient, then it starts to not make sense. But in some sites, it's a great solution. We've done analysis where you can add infinite amount more inches to a building, but you'd have to pay hundreds of years to pay that back for what you paid for it, versus solar, you pay it back in a much quicker timeline, and it starts to make sense. So it's really a data analysis of doing a life cycle cost analysis of how much am I paying for this up front, and when does that pay out in terms of energy savings. So for that,
and sometimes people are going to be at this home, if they're going to be there 10 years, 20 years, they don't know.
Right.
But sometimes to make that decision, they're like, they don't want to commit to something like that. I mean, some do it for the sensible reasons for the environment, and some are more worried about just kind of what their sort of next goal is in life, where they're going to be 10 years from now.
I think it's very interesting you talk about the life cycle of a building, because every building has a life cycle. And if I'm designing a home for myself, what is my longevity in the building? Right. And how do I figure out the cost based on that?
Yeah, I think that's something we often talk to our clients about that helps with decision making, right?
And same with developers we work with, like, what is your intended use for a building? I mean, some want to go and build something, sell it, and get out. Some are going to hold on to their property. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to do something good with all the systems and spend a little bit more money up front for the infrastructure on it and everything else, and then so you don't have problems and wear and tear later on. So it's about maintaining it, but there's a balance there too, like how much hard costs you want up front versus the life cycle costs for managing the building and efficiency of it. So.
Yeah. There's a lot going on here.
Yeah, I think this board just shows a breadth of what we were talking about, where we try multiple solutions, anything from, hey, is it a 3-story house or is this a more spread out 2-story house?
So this is one potential property.
These are, and then
these
are other sketches for prototypes as well that are in the works. But I think it shows some of the energy and kind of breadth of things that are studied in an early part of the process.
So what's going on here? I see the axis, and it looks like the sun, I'm assuming.
Yeah, so these are solar studies, right? You're saying the way that the sun is tracking at any given point of the year on the property, so we make sure and we're testing that the home gets proper light.
You see your north, south, east, west has times too, the summer solstice time and time PM, AM, and all these other things. So you want to look at all those, and we usually take a look at all the seasons typically as a first pass, and just seeing kind of like the, worst case and best case of what's going to happen with sunlight. And then from there we have enough knowledge to get to the next step. And then with that also is these studies like, doing 2-story versus 1-story. Some of it's affected with sun, some of it's about just the volume and how much your footprint is too. Because I mean, a lot of costs come into is like how much exterior wall do you have? Building 2-story versus 1-story, it's a big difference in cost sometimes too. So we look at that too, the volume of the space. Does it make more sense to do a 1-story if it's not needed to go higher for views or anything, or is it about separating out vertically because you can get a smaller footprint? Sometimes these discussions are happening with the contractor, hopefully up front, like we talked about. So they may say, hey, this is more, less per square foot to build than that because that has a lot more foundation or something like that. So we have to evaluate that as well when we're looking at these, not only from the environmental side, from the cost side, and then maybe there's a balance in between. Hopefully there is, and that's what we make our decision.
Yeah, it helps to give us and our clients better decision-making tools, right?
So is this how it all begins in a way, like a sketch like this?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes models, sometimes sketches, sometimes. I mean, the program diagrams, which actually are sort of here, that's a version of them, where all of the various spaces after initial interviews are filled out, and then initial site plans and how the building sits on the site and all that program comes together is tested.
I mean, it's kind of like a puzzle as we do. I mean, you can imagine it. You have generically you do just rectangles and squares, and you just cut them out, and you can say, okay, here's the adjacency we want. I want the bedroom close to here, and the living should be next to the kitchen, and then you start just moving around parts. It's almost like a puzzle, and that's where you say, here's one way of doing it. Here's another relationship with the spaces, and then it starts changing into forms. And these are generic, forms, but then you start looking at real proportions of what you need in the rooms, and it starts to develop. So it's some of that first is where you start, like what's the adjacencies. It might have a central focus. It may not because of the function. So this is really helpful.
If I was building this home, I'd love to have all this framed somewhere in the house at the end.
Oh yeah.
We have a few of those where we do that, drawings and sketches and do that.
That's cool.
I think there's one across there we framed.
That looks awesome, yeah.
Yeah, we can take a look at that. Yep.
This is big.
Yeah, I mean, these are just,
Yeah.
It's
again,
a
just
long house.
Yep. Yeah, it's almost like a villa. It's one of these Sand Valley homes too that will serve as a rental property for, and the idea is that you could get like 12 friends and all have a bedroom. And
Or have a
go
company
golf for the
here or
weekend.
something like
yeah,
that, yeah.
Exactly. So
this is one house?
yeah.
What are these, so why have these transitions between the homes like this?
Well, in this house, I think it was partially that there's I believe there's an owner's unit, and then the rest of it is rental. So the thought was that you could break that into a piece that's rental.
if they have to be there
Yeah.
occupying the same time and space,
Got it.
like this would be the owner's
That
unit,
makes-
this is the rental.
that
and
makes
this
a lot
might
of
be-
sense.
And I believe that the living spaces are in the middle and the bedrooms are on the ends, so it gives a little bit of clarity to when you enter, you come into the living spaces and the bedrooms have their own zone. So there's clarity, like you understand the layout without having to ask a question.
Yeah.
And it's intuitive.
And this shows the topography maps that we look at, for some of these. So like you tell here, in all these projects, there's stuff flanking sort of these mounds of sand there and the existing topography. So that's where we start developing too, is like, does it make sense that we dig into the topography, or is it just set it on top of the topography for views or whatever? So that's an important part of the fact finding is, getting all the information on the site, going out to the site, exploring it, taking photos, and then getting technical information and what we can and can't do.